Good morning. Thanks to everybody who sent reminders of the Star Trek episode that obviously reworks Gilgamesh, and very well, too. It's one of our favorite episodes. We've seen it a couple of times. I won't set up all the parallels. I will say this, though. Gilgamesh has been translated into almost all the world's languages. There's even a translation in Klingon, which I haven't consulted because that's a language I don't know. But I have consulted a lot of other translations, and I make use of them to get one coherent text out of this. I choose my favorite translations of certain lines, and once in a while I make up my own translation. Although I know nothing about the original cuneiform, I just take a stab. Somewhere in his musings on world literature, Goethe says that some questions seem to confront every generation of readers. A work from more than 3,000 years ago that scholars had to create the discipline of Assyriology and master languages obsolete for at least half that time before they could begin to understand it may seem almost insultingly useless in this computer-driven utilitarian era. And it's inscribed on broken and fragmentary clay tablets, no less. But here, in this place, we slow down a little bit for a couple of hours and sometimes muse on the useless. Who knows what we'll come up with? Tennyson says, "Keep a thing, its use will come." Well, we've kept this thing for 3 millennia. Let's give it another run. Gilgamesh is possibly humankind's first major literary achievement. Composed more than 3,000 years ago in cuneiform, the world's oldest script, it has only recently been recovered from the darkness of oblivion. George Smith, a brilliant amateur archaeologist and linguist, deciphered its language as he worked with fragments of broken clay tablets from the ruins of Ashurbanipal's library in Iraq. That's the Mesopotamian version of the Library of Alexandria, okay? It was 1872, just 150 years ago. In comparison with the Iliad, the Bible, and the Latin classics, it's a newcomer that we're just beginning to take in. The task is complicated by the state in which the poem comes down to us. Broken fragments of what were once entire clay tablets covered with cuneiform, the ancient writing system of the Near East. Pieces of the poem are still being recovered, and scholars believe that one day we'll have the whole thing. Because Gilgamesh disappeared for so long, except for some traces in other literature, like biblical literature, it is not part of the continuum of the culture of the West. It didn't generate a cultural legacy as Homer and the Bible did. It didn't generate a familiarity with itself, as works within the continuum do over time. When rediscovered, it was a genuinely foreign work. How do people respond to a genuinely foreign work, or foreign culture for that matter? When Europeans stumbled upon the Americas and their peoples in the 15th century, they tried to interpret the new worlds according to their ancient texts. In one instance, they tried to interpret the natives as the lost tribes of Israel, thus bringing them within the compass of their Bible. That's pretty much what the first modern commentators tried to do with Gilgamesh. It's 1839. A young Englishman, Austin Henry Layard, is making his way to Ceylon, where his family had used connections to get a place for him in the English colonial enterprise. A good starting point toward government posts for young men of his social class in the heyday of the British Empire. He finds the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh. And as a subject of a great empire, he believes he has the right to claim the library for the Queen. He brings it home to the British Museum, mostly in bits and pieces, broken clay tablets inscribed in a writing system nobody knows. There, young George Smith, employed by the museum, working brilliantly with the fragments, deciphers cuneiform. And lo, he comes upon what he thinks must be the Babylonian version of the flood story from Genesis, minus some lines from a missing part of the tablet. As his work proceeds, he sees what looks to him like confirmation of the biblical account of not just the flood, but of the first 11 chapters of Genesis, all the stories prior to the call of Abraham. In fact, he calls his book the Chaldean account of Genesis. His is a classic case of assimilating the unknown to the known, muffling the shock of collision with novelty, and at once possessing it for himself and his country and displacing it from the world it came from. Smith's apparent confirmation of the biblical flood story comes at a time when Victorian England, struggling to absorb the shock of Darwin and the new biblical criticism that undermined confidence in their religious worldview, so they were ready for it. This was giving them a little bit of hope. At first, the titles and fragments from Ashurbanipal's library seemed to yield exciting confirmation of some biblical names and dates. As work went on, it seemed to make a much more dramatic contribution to biblical study, what Smith called the Chaldean account of the deluge. The reviewer of Smith's book wrote, "The mythology, or rather the religion, of the Semitic polytheists has been conquered." After all, they were just thieves stealing from the Bible. But disquieting questions arose. Is this flood story another version of biblical truth, or is it confirmation of a common basis in myth and legend? How much of the Bible was true? The new textual criticism of the Bible, as well as Smith's find, raised questions about the composition of biblical books. Archaeology challenged the biblical chronology that many adhered to literally. Biblical textual criticism presented challenges to orthodoxy, and Darwinian theory suggested that blind chance did the work that that the Bible attributed to a creator. The New York Times reported on this, on Smith's talks before the British Archaeological Society right away, and they said this discovery is evidently destined to excite a lively controversy. For the present, the Orthodox people are in great delight and are very much prepossessed by the corroboration which the tablet affords to biblical history. It is possible, however, that the Chaldean inscription may be regarded as a confirmation of the statement that there are various traditions of the deluge, apart from the biblical one, which are perhaps legendary like the rest. Indeed, it turns out that the old Babylonian epics, Gilgamesh and others, are not reworkings of Genesis, but rather that, in part, the stories in Genesis are monotheistic reworkings of the Babylonian material. That's by way of introduction. I just want to set this culturally in place for us. And from there, we go to the poem. And one of the greatest things about the poem is its story of a friendship. Gilgamesh is king of Uruk, and he's described as a wild bull. He runs wild. Instead of taking care of the people who are supposed to live in the sheepfold of Uruk, he and his motorcycle gang run around the city, just having a good time, raising hell, and he claims the right of the first night. You know, that the ruler gets the first night with every young woman who's intending to get married. And he takes this despite the harm it does. The bride has to submit, the groom has to just take it on the chin. Well, the people complain. They complain to the gods. Do something about this. And so the gods take it to heart. They say, he needs a match. He needs someone to go up against, to butt against. Let's create someone, something that can be a match for what they call the storm of his heart. Now, this is partly the storm of a young man's heart. Partly, it's the storm of that heroic impulse that it's hard to fit the hero into any culture. He tends to be a kind of protuberance that the culture struggles to contain. It almost breaks trying to keep him in, and he can do a lot of damage, but at the same time, great good. So remember the storm of his heart. Enkidu, the man they create, well, he's not a man yet. He's half beast. They create him out of a piece of clay, because that's what we are, clay, like the clay tablets on which the poem is inscribed. In his original condition, Enkidu runs with the animals and participates only in an animal's simple self-awareness. The compensation for this simplicity is that he has no anguished self-consciousness, no awareness of death, no awareness of the rupture of individuality, the wound of separate existence. To bring Enkidu to Gilgamesh, he has to be in some way humanized. A woman. There's a temple prostitute, Shamhat, a working girl. They bring her to Enkidu. Her guide says, see him over there? He's a pretty good-looking guy, ain't he? Bare your body. Let him smell your sex. Let him see your sex. You'll take him over in a second. Sure enough, Enkidu comes close, whoop, and he's on her. For 6 days and 6 nights, Gilgamesh effing the priestess, as one modern translator puts it. This, for fun, I have to share with you. My first reading of Gilgamesh, I had a very old text. I didn't know what I was doing. It was not up with modern scholarship. It was not up to modern standards and values and ideas of what's appropriate. And so I'm reading along. The animals come to the water and their hearts are glad. Enkidu, who eats grass with the gazelles, he sees the prostitute, the savage man from the depths of the steppe. Is est meritrix nuda sinum tuum, noli cum tare et aproquim quare, cum videte apopinquat tibi. They substituted Latin. They put the sex scene into Latin. And it goes on in Latin for, I don't know, 15, 20 lines. And then when there's another sex scene, they go back to Latin. Okay? I'm not sure of the date of that translation, because the text I have gives a later date for this republication. But it's got to be somewhere in the early or the latter part of the 19th century, around the time that the tablets were discovered and the accounts became public. Okay, so you can see the difference between that and effing the priestess. All right. But to give you an idea of cultural inhibition, I said effing the priestess. I didn't use the word that our translator actually used. I censored myself, okay? After all, look where I am. But now Enkidu has enjoyed sexual life, and this has changed him magically. It's one of the many magical transformations that we see in old stories. Eat this piece of fruit, you'll become wise. Eat this one, you'll live forever. Talking snakes, all those things. So magically, he's transformed. And now the other animals want nothing to do with him. They sense that there's something wrong here too. And so they run away from him. And he's lonely and alone. He doesn't know what to do. And Shamhat says to him, look, what do you want this life for anyway? This is wildness. This is not for you. Let me take you to the city. And let me tell you what's there for you. A friend. A friend. Well, before Enkidu can be incorporated into the life of the city, he has to learn certain things, like to eat bread. He's never done that before. He grazed. To drink beer. He's never done that before. He gets wildly drunk, and there's another 6 days and 6 nights with the prostitute. But the final step, really, is incorporation into the life of Gilgamesh. And when the two encounter, they encounter like two wild bulls. Enkidu senses that there's something wrong about this rite of the first night. And he gets in front of the bridal chamber and puts his leg in front of the door, and he won't let Gilgamesh in. And they fight. They fight terrifically, terribly. Almost, you can't tell really from the text if anybody wins. But it's enough. They cement their relationship. Gilgamesh and Enkidu are now friends. I might as well bring this up now. People ask, scholars and just ordinary readers, is it a gay relationship? I don't know. I can't tell. It might well be, because I don't think the sexual contours are chiseled as firmly in this ancient culture as we like to think they are in our own day, as we like to think they are anyway. It could well be. But they also enjoy women, as is clear from Enkidu's fun with the priestess. But Gilgamesh still has this great heart, this fire in his heart. He's going to be better in the city, but he wants something more. He wants adventure, heroic adventure. Let's go get Humbaba, who guards the forest of cedar. With you, I can do it. Enkidu has some doubts. The whole city has doubts, but Gilgamesh brushes them aside. I'm going. His mother complains, why, Shamash, the special god of Gilgamesh, why did you give him this restless heart? It's going to kill him. Hang on a second. I wanted to say a bit about the heroic code. When Gilgamesh is beating down the opposition to this expedition to the cedar forest, he says to Enkidu, who says, I'm a little bit afraid of this. Humbaba's quite a thing, And Gilgamesh says, what are we for? We live, we die. We have to leave something behind. We leave behind a name, our honor, our glory. The people remember us. This is very much like what you'll find in the Iliad, okay? The heroic code of living and dying. And at this point, Gilgamesh shows no apprehension about death. If he dies in the enterprise, he dies heroically. That's all that counts. Well, they go out together and they take on Humbaba. Just before the battle, there's a great touching moment when again Enkidu quails. Do we really want to do this? And Gilgamesh says, wonderful line, touch my heart. And Enkidu touches his friend's heart, and from that he takes spirit. And they fight Humbaba together. They win. They kill Humbaba. They return to the city and ticker tape parades, during which Gilgamesh's beauty arouses the desire of the sex goddess Ishtar, who woos him very erotically. He's not having any. He recites to her the list of her lovers who've come to a bad end once she's drained them dry. Spurned, she seeks revenge by sending the bull of heaven to devastate Uruk, the city. But together the friends slay the bull. And then Enkidu tears off the bull's haunch, some translations say penis, and throws it in Ishtar's face. Howling, she retreats and gathers her cult woman to lament over the haunch, penis of the bull. Well, you know that something bad is going to happen to somebody. Enkidu has a dream of the underworld, and dreams are access to truth. Enkidu dreams of the underworld, and it's dismal and dark, and you eat dust, not food. Everyone is enslaved to the lords of the underworld. It's not a place you want to rush to. And he tells Gilgamesh about it. Gilgamesh says it can't be. You're all right. This is just, a piece of cheese that you ate and you've got indigestion. But the dream repeats itself. And soon, Enkidu takes sick. And he wastes away. And one of the most terrible things for him to face is that his death is not heroic. He's just dying of some wasting disease. And he curses. He starts with the one who led the temple prostitute to him, the hunter who was the guide. I curse you and I curse the day you did it. He curses the prostitute. He curses everything he's encountered in the human world, which has just opened up for him the wound of his separateness, the wound of his death, the extinction of that separateness. Once we are separate, that's all we know. And we love our lives, every gory minute of them. The one thing he doesn't curse is Gilgamesh, his friend. Shamash, the special god who's been sponsoring and protecting these men, appears to him and says, why? Why curse? Look, the prostitute, she led you into the world where you eat bread, where you drink beer, where you enjoy festivals, where you enjoy the love of Gilgamesh, your friend. You have a friend. And Enkidu, he lets go of his rage, and he says, I take it back. I bless the hunter. I bless the prostitute. I bless my human life. For Gilgamesh, it's another thing. This loss of his friend leaves him unconsolable, terribly disconsolate. He's lost the love of his life. More than that, he doesn't want to part from the body of his friend. This is, mind you, of Achilles and Patroclus. You know? The body. He sits by the body for 6 days and 6 nights, and then on the 7th day, he watches as a maggot crawls out of Enkidu's nose. And he says, "Will this happen to me?" Now it's shifted from grief for the loss of Enkidu to a horror at what lies ahead for him. He will not accept this. His great heart bursts with the need to do something about it. But he doesn't know what. He goes back into the wild where Enkidu came from, and he relives a certain part of that wildness. He dresses in animal skins. He slays animals and eats them raw. But it's not like Enkidu's life there, which was innocent. Enkidu ran with the animals and protected them. Gilgamesh is killing them and wearing their skins and letting himself in other ways go to hell. And that's when he runs into the barmaid, the one whom I quoted earlier. And she says to him, "No, the life you seek you'll never find. The gods didn't set it up that way. You're going to die. The question is, how do you live in the meantime?" And she says, "Let your belly be full. Be merry day and night. Let your garments be sparkling fresh. Your head be washed. Bathe in water. Pay heed to the little one who holds your hand. Let a spouse delight in your bosom." Now that may sound like just a hedonism, but I don't think so. You overcome that loneliness of separate existence through the companionship of wife and child. This is advice to live a simple, normal life. A great heart brings great torment. Gilgamesh can't accept it. He says to her, "Where do I go from here? Where do I get the boat to Urshanabi?" I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. She directs him. She can't stop him, so she directs him on the next leg of his journey. Urshanabi is the boatman who will eventually get Gilgamesh to Utnapishtim, who is the Babylonian Noah. Here's where the flood story comes in. The Babylonian Noah and his wife, Utnapishtim, and I forget what her name is, if she's given one. But at any rate, they survived the flood, and they were made deathless by the gods. And so Gilgamesh says, "That's the guy I want to talk to." Well, it's another stage in the epic journey, but Gilgamesh makes it to Utnapishtim. And he says, "How did you do it? How do I do it?" And Utnapishtim says, "You've got to hear my story." And he tells the story of the flood. And here the remarkable resemblance to the biblical story, including doves and ravens and this and that and the other thing. But with this important difference that Utnapishtim comes out to see the devastation of the flood, and he weeps for the loss of everything. And there was no reason given for it, really, just the gods get in the mood and they kill everybody. You know, it wasn't that human beings were evil and they had to be wiped out. It's just a crazy whim that they lament and regret, but it's too late. But Utnapishtim sees the damage and he weeps. When Noah comes out, he's supposed to bear witness to what God does. He does not weep. He just testifies. Gilgamesh says, still, I want deathlessness. Utnapishtim says, let's see, can you stand it? He says, just sit here awake with me for a while. We'll talk. Gilgamesh, exhausted from the heroic struggle he's had even to get here, falls asleep just like that. He's dead tired. Utnapishtim says to his wife, bake a loaf of bread. The next day, bake another. And we'll show him the mold on the first loaf, second loaf, and so forth. We'll show him how long he slept. He sleeps for 7 days. And then he wakes up and he says, where were we? You know? And Utnapishtim says, you want life immortal? You want to be immortal? You can't stand life without a break. You need a break every day for sleep. Get out of here. And Gilgamesh has to pick himself up and get ready to go. Utnapishtim's wife says, give him something in consolation. And so Utnapishtim says, okay, there's a plant. Now this can be misunderstood, but it's very clear in the careful reading of the text. It's a plant that rejuvenates. It can restore youth. It doesn't make you deathless, but it can restore youth. And most of us would settle for it, right? Well, Gilgamesh has to get it. It's another stage in his epic journey. He has to go to a river and put stones on his feet, tie stones to his feet, and dive way down into the depths. But he comes back with the plant, and he sets it down. Man, he's tired and thirsty. He dips his head into the water to drink. Along comes a snake and steals it. Steals it. And all Gilgamesh can say is, oh my, I was going to bring that, and he shows his generosity. He was intending to bring that back to the city for his people. He wasn't going to just hog it for himself. That's why he didn't just glom it right away. He wanted to bring it back. Now all he can do is make his way back to the city in defeat. Sort of. Because what he's tried to do has been so wonderful. It seems to me that the poem suggests that Gilgamesh is aged by this. Not chronologically, but in some way, he starts out a young man, he comes back old. Maybe not ancient, but old. And when he reaches the city, he looks at it. He says to the one who accompanied him, helped him get back, he says, see the city, see the walls. And he repeats the beginning of the poem where the city was celebrated and where his role in the building of the city was prominent. See it, look upon it. 2/3 temple, or 1/3 temple, 1/3 habitat, 1/3 clay pits. Constant reminders of crumbling mortality, the clay pits, not only of the tablets, the Gilgamesh tablets, which are, after all, fired clay, but also of the human being who was a handful of clay. But he takes pride in it, a kind of quiet pride. And I would say this about the ending of the poem. Iris, see how I cut this, made it work? I would say this about the ending of the poem. To strive for immortality, the immortalization of oneself, can mean the addition to the human artifact of something more permanent than we are ourselves. The city, the story, that too is part of the human artifact. The human city is more permanent than we are, yet mortal like us. After all, where is Uruk today? Nonetheless, that's our work. Gilgamesh shoulders his mortal life in the mortal human city. He set out on a quest for personal deathlessness. Instead, he found the consolation and continuity of belonging and contributing to human culture. And along the way, he had a great friendship.